The air in the dilapidated tenement building was perpetually thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke, cheap disinfectant, and the unspoken desperation of its inhabitants. It clung to everything, a suffocating blanket woven from poverty and neglect. For Elias, a boy no older than 6, this was the only world he had ever known. His home was a single, grimy room, shared with a mother whose eyes held the vacant stare of someone long since broken, and a parade of men whose faces blurred into a composite of stubble, sweat, and fleeting cruelty. Elias learned early that tears were useless, kindness a mirage, and silence a shield. He became adept at blending into the shadows, a small, observant presence that went unnoticed, unvalued, and therefore, unburdened by the expectations of a world that offered him nothing. His education wasn't in textbooks, but in the harsh realities of survival. He learned to decipher the subtle shifts in his mother's moods, the pre-violence tremors in the hands of the men who frequented their room, and the fleeting opportunities to snatch a discarded morsel of food from the communal garbage bins. He learned the rhythm of the city's decay, the screech of distant sirens, the murmur of illicit deals echoing from the fire escapes. His senses, sharpened by constant vigilance, became his allies. He could hear a mouse scuttling in the walls, feel the tremor of heavy footsteps before they reached his door, and detect the faint metallic tang of blood long before it materialized. The first turning point, the nascent spark that would eventually ignite the inferno, arrived on a bleak Tuesday evening. Elias, curled into a tight ball beneath a threadbare blanket, feigning sleep, witnessed an act of brutality that seared itself onto his nascent consciousness. A man, larger and more menacing than the usual assortment, had entered their room, his face a mask of drunken rage. His mother, already frail, was no match for his fury. The sounds that followed the sickening thud of flesh against flesh, the choked cries, the guttural roars resonated with a primal terror that paralyzed Elias. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing himself invisible, wishing the world would simply cease to exist. When the man finally left, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a whimpering figure on the floor, Elias slowly uncurled. His mother lay broken, not just physically, but her spirit, too, seemed to have shattered into irreparable fragments. In that moment, something within Elias shifted. The fear, for the first time, was overshadowed by a cold, unfamiliar sensation. A burning, silent rage. It wasn't the volatile, explosive anger of an adult, but a quiet, simmering intensity, a resolve that hardened his features and sharpened his gaze. He looked at his mother, then at his own small, trembling hands, and a silent vow was forged in the crucible of his pain. He would never again be powerless. He would never again witness such helplessness. The next few months were a blur of quiet observation. Elias, a tiny, almost invisible shadow, began to meticulously study the world around him. He learned the routes of the local drug dealers, the times they exchanged money and product, the blind spots in their vigilance. He noticed the casual brutality of the neighborhood bullies, the subtle cues of their aggression, the weaknesses in their posturing. He became a living camera, recording every detail, every interaction, every vulnerability. His mind, previously occupied by the simple desires of a child, warmth, food, safety, now became a meticulously organized repository of information, a nascent database of the underworld. His physical training began almost instinctively. He would spend hours in the abandoned lot behind their building, practicing balance on crumbling walls, refining his agility by navigating piles of discarded debris, and developing his stealth by moving silently through the shadows. He learned to control his breathing, to still his rapid heartbeat, to become one with the stillness of the night. His small size, once a weakness, became his greatest asset. He could slip through cracks, squeeze into tight spaces, and disappear into the urban landscape with an ease that defied his age. The true turning point, the moment Elias truly embarked on his path, came through an unexpected encounter. One evening, while scavenging for food in a wealthier part of the city, he stumbled upon a scene that drew him in with an almost magnetic pull. A man, impeccably dressed, was meticulously dismantling and cleaning a firearm in the dimly lit back room of a pawn shop. The man's hands were calloused, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Elias, hidden behind a stack of dusty old books, watched with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The man, an old, grizzled Korean war veteran named Silas, eventually noticed the boy. Instead of chasing him away, Silas, a man who had seen too much and felt too little, found himself intrigued by the unwavering focus in Elias's eyes. He saw not fear, but a thirst for knowledge, a nascent spark of something dangerous and compelling. Silas, a former Black Ops operative, now a lonely relic of a forgotten war, saw a reflection of his younger self in the boy's silent intensity. Over the next few weeks, Elias, driven by an insatiable curiosity, began to frequent Silas's shop. Silas, initially wary, found himself drawn to the boy's quiet determination. He started by teaching Elias basic self-defense, not as a sport but as a philosophy of survival. He taught him how to assess an opponent, how to use leverage and momentum, how to disarm and incapacitate. He instilled in Elias the importance of efficiency, of moving with purpose, of conserving energy. Then came the weapons. Silas, sensing an innate aptitude in the boy, began to introduce him to the intricacies of firearms. He started with airsoft guns, then gradually moved to smaller caliber weapons, teaching Elias about their mechanisms, their trajectory, their effective range. He emphasized safety, discipline, and the profound responsibility that came with handling such instruments of power. He taught him how to clean, maintain, and disassemble weapons with an almost surgical precision. Elias, with his nimble fingers and sharp mind, absorbed every lesson like a sponge, his memory a perfect photographic record of every detail. Silas, initially viewing it as a morbid curiosity, a way to pass the time in his solitary existence, soon realized the gravity of what he was doing. He was forging a weapon, molding a killer, yet he couldn't stop. There was something about Elias, a silent intensity, a core of cold determination that transcended his youth. He saw the fire in the boy's eyes, the unyielding resolve that whispered of a past trauma, a future path. Silas, a man hardened by war, recognized the nascent stages of a professional, a true operative. He began to teach Elias about surveillance, about pattern recognition, about the art of blending in and disappearing. He taught him how to read people, to identify tells, to exploit weaknesses. He taught him about the shadows, about moving unseen, unheard, and leaving no trace. Elias's learning accelerated at an alarming rate. He had an almost supernatural ability to retain information, to adapt to new techniques, to execute complex maneuvers with an effortless grace that belied his age. He was a natural, a prodigy of violence. Silas, despite his initial misgivings, found a strange sense of purpose in shaping this raw talent. He was creating a legacy, a ghost that would haunt the forgotten corners of the city. He saw in Elias not just a student, but a reflection of his own past, a chance to impart the hard-won wisdom of a lifetime spent in the shadows. He gave Elias the tools, the knowledge, and the mindset. He unknowingly forged the genesis of a ghost, a whisper in the darkness that would soon become a chilling roar. The stage was set, the player molded, and the curtain about to rise on a life of silent retribution. The transformation from Elias, the vulnerable child, to the whisper, as the streets would soon come to know him, was not an abrupt leap, but a gradual, chilling descent into the heart of the shadow world. Silas, his unlikely mentor, had instilled in him not just the mechanics of combat and the intricacies of weaponry, but a philosophy, a cold, calculated pragmatism. Emotions are a luxury you cannot afford, kid. Silas had grunted one afternoon, watching Elias meticulously reassemble a Glock 17. They cloud judgment, make you sloppy. In this life, sloppiness gets you buried. Elias absorbed the lesson, letting his feelings recede into a deep, inaccessible vault within his mind. The rage he once felt, the pain, the fear they were now fuel, transmuted into a cold, unwavering focus. His first job was not an assignment, but a deeply personal vendetta, born from the simmering injustice that had defined his early life. The man, the same one who had brutalized his mother, reappeared in the neighborhood. Elias, now 9 years old, recognized him instantly. The man's face, etched with the usual blend of arrogance and casual cruelty, ignited the dormant embers of Elias's original vow. This wasn't about revenge in the emotional sense. It was about balance, about an almost mathematical equation of cause and effect. Elias had been meticulously tracking the man for weeks. He knew his habits. The rundown bar he frequented, the dark alley he used as a shortcut, the predictable route he took home, drunk and vulnerable. He planned with the meticulous precision Silas had taught him, calculating every variable, every potential pitfall. He chose his tools carefully. Not a firearm too loud, too traceable for a first foray. Instead, a finely honed shiv, crafted from a discarded piece of metal and sharpened to a razor's edge. He'd practiced with it on old tires, on discarded meat, learning the precise angles, the minimum force required for maximum effect. The night was moonless, the air thick with the promise of rain. Elias, a small, dark silhouette, waited in the alley, melting into the brickwork. His heart, against Silas's teachings, pounded with a primal rhythm, a mixture of anticipation and an icy calm. When the man stumbled into the alley, a slurred curse escaping his lips, Elias moved. He was a blur of motion, silent as a whisper, swift as a shadow. He struck with a practiced efficiency that defied his years, a single, precise thrust. The man gasped, a choked, gurgling sound, and then collapsed. Elias, standing over him, felt no triumph, no catharsis, only a profound stillness. He left no trace, no witness, vanishing back into the night as if he had never been there. The streets, unknowingly, had their first taste of the whisper. The incident, though never officially reported as a murder, created a ripple in the underworld. Rumors spread like wildfire. A ghost, a shadow, striking with impossible speed and leaving no evidence. The word ghost stuck, but it soon became entwined with the chilling observation that the victim was always someone who had preyed on the vulnerable, the forgotten. The low-level thugs, the petty drug dealers, the abusers, they began to feel an unseen hand tighten around their necks. Silas, upon hearing the street whispers, recognized Elias's handiwork. He didn't admonish the boy. Instead, a grim satisfaction settled over his features. "You left no trace, kid. That's the mark of a true professional." He saw the potential for a new kind of justice, a cleaner, more efficient one, operating outside the flawed mechanisms of the law. He began to subtly guide Elias, feeding him information about those who truly deserved a visit from the ghost. He provided not just targets, but a deeper understanding of the criminal ecosystem, the power structures, the vulnerabilities. Elias, driven by an innate sense of order and a silent, unyielding code, became Silas's instrument. He didn't take payment. His currency was the chilling satisfaction of balance restored. His targets were carefully selected. A human trafficker preying on runaway teens, a lone shark who had ruined countless lives, a corrupt cop turning a blind eye to unspeakable atrocities. He became a silent arbiter, a bringer of an invisible reckoning. His methods evolved. He wasn't just a physical threat. He was a master of psychological warfare. He would leave subtle, unsettling signs. A single, black feather left on a pillow, a child's toy placed on a mobster's desk, a perfectly folded origami crane in a drug dealer's pocket. These seemingly innocuous items, delivered with spectral precision, whispered of an unseen presence, a chilling awareness of their private lives, their deepest fears. The targets, already paranoid, would unravel, their lives consumed by a terror they couldn't name, a phantom they couldn't catch. And then, when their minds were ripe for the reaping, the whisper would descend. His legend grew, fueled by the terrifying lack of evidence. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no motive that made sense to the authorities. The victims simply vanished, or were found in impossible circumstances, leaving behind only the chilling tales of a shadow that moved like a spirit, striking with the precision of an expert. The police were baffled, dismissing it as urban legend, gang-related cleanup, or a string of unrelated disappearances. But the underworld, the very people Elias hunted, knew better. They spoke of the child ghost, the silent reaper, the whisper. Elias, by the time he was 12, was a master of disguise, surveillance, and infiltration. He could seamlessly blend into any environment, adopting the mannerisms and speech patterns of different social strata. He could navigate the city's underbelly, its forgotten tunnels, its labyrinthine rooftops, with the ease of a native. He knew every blind spot, every escape route, every hidden nook. His body, though still small, was a finely tuned instrument, capable of incredible feats of agility and strength. He could scale walls like a gecko, move through vents like a serpent, and run for miles without showing a hint of exhaustion. Silas, observing his protégé's evolution, felt a complex mix of pride and a profound, quiet despair. He had created something extraordinary, something terrible. Elias was a force of nature, an unstoppable engine of retribution. But he was also a child robbed of his childhood, a soul forged in the fires of injustice and solitude. Silas often wondered what would become of him, whether the endless cycle of violence would eventually consume him. Yet, he also knew that Elias, the Whisper, had found a terrible purpose, a grim reason to exist in a world that had offered him nothing but pain. The world outside their grim reality remained oblivious. To them, Elias was just another nameless child, a phantom on the fringes of society. But in the shadows, where fear and power intertwined, the Whisper was a chilling reality, a silent promise of reckoning. The young ghost of the gutter, always listening, always watching, always waiting to collect his dues. His reign had just begun, and the city, unknowingly, was holding its breath. The whispers of his legend were growing louder, carrying on the wind, a chilling testament to the deadliest child America had ever seen. Years blurred into a relentless procession of shadows and targets. Elias, now 15, bore little resemblance to the wide-eyed boy who had once huddled in the corner of a dilapidated room. His frame, while still lean, had hardened, his movements imbued with a predatory grace. His eyes, once holding a flicker of youthful vulnerability, were now a deep, unsettling onyx, reflecting only the cold calculation of a seasoned operative. The moniker The Whisper was no longer just a street rumor. It was a chilling reality, spoken in hushed tones by kingpins and street rats alike. He was a force of nature, an urban myth brought to life, an invisible hand guiding the city's grim dance. Silas, now frail and increasingly riddled with the illnesses of old age, watched Elias's evolution with a mixture of awe and profound sorrow. He had forged a masterpiece, but a living weapon, devoid of much of the human emotion he once possessed. Elias was efficient, precise, and utterly ruthless when necessary. He had expanded his reach, taking on targets far beyond Silas's initial scope, delving into the shadowy world of international crime, exposing vast networks of exploitation and corruption. He spoke multiple languages, understood complex financial structures, and could navigate the dark web with the ease of a digital native. His network of informants, built on a foundation of fear and grudging respect, stretched across the continent. He was no longer just a street avenger. He was an anonymous, unstoppable force, leaving a trail of collapsed empires and shattered lives. One evening, as the last rays of a bruised sunset painted the sky, Elias sat beside Silas in the back of the pawn shop. The old man was wheezing, his breath shallow, his eyes distant. "You've gone too far, kid," Silas whispered, his voice raspy. "You've become what you hunt, the monster you swore to fight." Elias remained silent, his gaze fixed on a worn photograph on Silas's workbench, a picture of a younger Silas, smiling, a woman beside him, her face blurred by time. "I bring balance," Elias finally said, his voice a low, even monotone. "They preyed on the innocent. I stopped them. And who protects you from becoming the predator?" Silas countered, a flicker of pain in his eyes. "Who gives you peace? A life of shadows, Elias, is a life unlived. You're a ghost, and ghosts, eventually, fade into nothing. The words, though gentle, struck a chord in Elias. For the first time in years, a faint tremor of something akin to self-doubt rippled through his carefully constructed composure. He had dedicated his entire being to this path, believing it to be the only way to atone for the helplessness of his past. But Silas's words echoed the quiet, unacknowledged emptiness that sometimes gnawed at the edges of his solitude. The moment was interrupted by a desperate call on Silas's burner phone. It was an informant, his voice trembling with fear. A group of human traffickers, notorious for their brutality, had taken a busload of young runaways, including children, and were moving them to a remote warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The informant had overheard their plans, the chilling details of their auction. Elias felt the familiar surge of cold determination. This was his purpose, the reason he existed. He rose, gathering his gear with practiced efficiency. "I have to go." Silas, with a pained sigh, watched him. "Be careful, Elias. Even ghosts can be caught." The operation was meticulously planned, a multi-pronged assault of stealth, technological infiltration, and precision strikes. Elias, using his vast network, had already pinpointed the warehouse, mapped its entry points, and analyzed its security protocols. He moved through the night like a phantom, bypassing alarms, neutralizing guards with silent efficiency, his movements a blur of calculated violence. He was no longer just dealing with petty thugs. These were hardened criminals, well-armed, well-trained. But Elias, the Whisper, was more than trained. He was a force of nature, a living weapon forged in the crucible of urban despair. He found the children, huddled together, terrified, in a caged section of the warehouse. Their wide, fearful eyes, their trembling bodies, they mirrored the helplessness he had felt as a child. A cold fury, distinct from his usual detached resolve, ignited within him. This was not just a target. It was an echo of his past, a stark reminder of the very reason he walked this dark path. The ensuing confrontation was swift and brutal. Elias, armed with silenced weapons and an arsenal of non-lethal incapacitants, moved like a demon through the warehouse. He disarmed, disoriented, and neutralized the traffickers with a chilling efficiency. Their shouts, their threats, their panicked gunfire, they were useless against the silent, relentless advance of the Whisper. He moved through the chaos, a dark blur, leaving behind a trail of unconscious bodies and the chilling silence of victory. As the last trafficker fell, Elias stood amidst the trembling children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He looked at their small, innocent faces, their fragile hopes, and for a fleeting moment, the mask he wore cracked. He saw himself in them, and he saw the potential for a future free from the horrors he had endured. He arranged for their safe transport, using a carefully constructed anonymous tip to bring in the authorities after he had vanished. He left no trace, no clue, only the bewildered, terrified expressions of the criminals and the silent relief of the rescued children. Back in Silas's shop, the old man was gone. Elias found him slumped in his chair, a peaceful expression on his face, the worn photograph clutched in his hand. Silas had passed away in his sleep, a quiet departure that mirrored the life he had lived in the shadows. Elias felt a pang, sharp and unexpected, a sensation he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Silas, the grumpy, cynical mentor, had been the closest thing he had to family, the only one who truly understood the monstrous path he walked. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the shop pressing in on him. The city outside buzzed with its usual chaotic energy, oblivious to the silent passing of a quiet legend, and the even quieter internal struggle of another. He picked up the photograph, his fingers tracing the blurred features of Silas's smile. The rescue of the children, coupled with Silas's death, had a profound impact on Elias. He had saved lives, yes, but at what cost to his own soul? Silas's words echoed in his mind. A life of shadows is a life unlived. He had become an instrument, a force of retribution, but what was left of the boy named Elias? Was he truly bringing balance? Or was he merely perpetuating a different kind of violence? The answer didn't come immediately, but a shift occurred within him. He continued his work, but with a renewed introspection. He began to question the endless cycle, the price of his power. He realized that while he could dismantle criminal empires, he couldn't heal the wounds they inflicted. He could bring justice, but not peace. The legend of the Whisper continued to grow, but the ghost himself was beginning to change. The cold, unfeeling operative began to experience fleeting moments of empathy, glimpses of the innocent boy he once was. The echoes of his own lost innocence, magnified by the faces of the children he saved, began to resonate within him. He was still the deadliest child in America, a shadow in the night, a silent bringer of reckoning. But a new question began to form in his mind, a question that would define his future. Could the whisper of vengeance ever truly become the whisper of hope? The answer remained elusive, shrouded in the shifting shadows of his complex and increasingly lonely existence. The price of power was clear, but the path to redemption, if it even existed, was still a mystery, waiting to be unveiled in the quiet, unsettling echo of his own soul.